Hello and welcome to this UKRI UNDP Joint Report Call webinar. In this webinar, we'll be providing information about the UKRI UNDP Joint Report, how science, research and innovation can best contribute to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals for developing countries. We'll also be explaining how to submit an expression of interest. My name's Kirsty and I'll be your online host for today's webinar. In a few moments, I'll hand over to our presenters, Stuart Taberner and Amy Mays from UKRI. Stuart and Amy will present the webinar, after which they will be joined by Pedro from UNDP and Roshni from UKRI, who will be helping to answer your questions for the second half of the webinar. We invite you to submit questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll respond to those at an appropriate point. I'm now going to hand over to Stuart, who's going to start us off.
So welcome everybody. My name's Stuart Taberner. I'm the Director of Interdisciplinary and International Research here at UKRI. I'm just going to spend a couple of moments explaining the essentials of the call, really, which is basically summarising what was in the initial document, but just to restate those again to get us going. So really this is, if you look at your slides now, this is a call jointly with UNDP. To produce a report which will feed directly into UNDP's programming and also into our research agenda here at the Global Chance Research Fund over the next couple of years. And if you look at the second slide, you'll see a picture of Pathways for Peace, which is really to give you an idea of the kind of thing we're looking for at the end of this call that we're looking to be produced over the next year or so, which is a major report, a major intervention on this topic, which can then go ahead and shape policy and practice at UNDP, but also more broadly across the sector, and also help us shape our research agenda at GCRF over the next couple of years. So Pathways for Peace is an example of that type of report, where UNDP brought together a small team of researchers and colleagues from within UNDP to produce a large-scale report, gathering evidence, developing arguments, and producing a set of recommendations that then leads directly into programming. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for, but in this case, focus more broadly on the topic of how science, research and innovation contribute to meeting the SDGs for developing countries. So it really is looking at the very broad scope of how investing in research can push forward that agenda with regards to the SDGs. So looking at slide 3 now, the stimulus for the report is provided very much by the SDGs, which set out an agenda for inclusive and sustainable development, as I'm sure you're aware. And the aim of the present call is to support a joint UK UNDP team to develop this kind of landmark report on how investment in science, research and innovation might best deliver the kinds of innovations in policy, practice and products that are required to achieve those SDGs. And also, and importantly, whilst also taking into account the many intersections, interactions and tensions between those SDGs. So we're looking at something that talks about how science and research and innovation can really push us forward towards those SDGs, but also something that is very conscious of the obstacles that stand in the way to achieving that. So something that's also usable and practical on the ground. And we're looking for something that really reaches across the entire spectrum of global challenges and SDGs. So things like artificial intelligence, digital technologies, big data, but also, of course, taking into account all the social, political, cultural, and technological constraints that these new approaches are also likely to encounter. So we're looking for a very subtle, sophisticated, nuanced report that balances, makes judgments, puts forward the opportunities and possibilities of science and technology and research for the SDGs, while also taking into account the obstacles and difficulties that there will be to delivering those things. And what we're looking for at the end is a really significant policy intervention that can help shape UNDP programming over the immediate and medium term, as well as shaping the science, research and innovation agenda towards the 2030 SDG goals, really on a global level. So we're looking beyond the UK, but also to set a kind of global landmark report that can really push the way forward internationally, not just in the UK. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what we're looking for through this call. Now Amy's going to take over from me now and look at the kind of technical aspects of how to actually apply.
Hello, I'm Amy Mays. I'm going to be talking you through the expression of interest stage and how to apply. So first of all, just thinking about who can apply. So the normal Research Council eligibility rules apply. You can see further information on eligibility on our webpage, but the eligibility does include UK higher education institutions, research institutions, and you can see there's a list of eligible institutes. Some NHS bodies with research capacity, and you can again see further guidance on eligible costs for this. And other organisations may also be eligible to become independent research organisations if they possess an existing in-house capacity or carry out research that materially extends and enhances the national research base and are able to demonstrate on independent capability to undertake and lead research programmes. So for more information on that, you can click on the webpage and have a look at that. Innovate UK Catapult Centres do not currently meet the Research Council's eligibility criteria for independent research organisations as they have been established by the public sector as detailed in the Research Council's joint statement on eligibility. But the organisations that are eligible to apply for UKR research funding may work in partnership or in collaborations with any other organisation irrespective of its eligibility. So this can include catapult centres. So this is just a key way of ensuring that academic or catapult can collaborate. So if you have any specific questions around your eligibility, you can always email the GCRF mailbox and we'll be able to get back to you about whether you would be eligible to apply. Within the expressions of interest, you should try to address the following, thinking about the assessment criteria. If successful, you will be expected to detail this more comprehensively within your full application. So potential and importance of science, research and innovation for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. The interlinkages and relationships between Sustainable Development Goals and how advances in science, research and innovation can enhance our understanding of this. The opportunities for science, research and innovation to make the pathways between the SDGs more visible and make innovation more possible and affordable. The areas in which science, research and innovation can make the most difference. The obstacles to properly deploying science, technology, research and innovation in sustainable international development and how we might overcome them. And new ways of engaging policymakers and making science, research and innovation central to decision-making in developing countries. So the expression of interest is through a SMART survey. I'm going to run through the actual SMART survey, and if you'd like a copy of the SMART survey, there is one uploaded onto the system which you can view, as well as a handout of all of these slides. So on the first page of the SMART survey, you'll be asked about the principal investigator. You may only apply once as principal investigator, and the PI should not be changed between the expression of interest and full stage without prior permission being granted from UKRI and UNDP. We encourage everyone who would like to apply to speak with their research office as they will be delivering the award if successful. On the second expression of interest page on the SMART survey, so you please complete information about the report. This will include council remit, and please indicate which council you think your proposal falls most under. The funding available for this call. So UKRI will provide funding for up to $500,000 for one successful team to jointly produce the report with UNDP. The duration of the report should be within 24 months, and the successful proposal would be expected to start between December 2018 and January 2019. The funding for this call is through the Global Challenges Research Fund, which is a key component of the delivery of the UK aid strategy tackling global challenges in the national interest, which Stuart spoke about earlier. The next section of the SMART survey, page 3, this section asks you to complete information about the proposed research team. So it is envisioned that applicants will create dynamic teams which contain senior researchers, postdoctoral fellows and support staff as necessary. We would expect you to choose and then in your full application to fully justify your team. Interdisciplinary projects are encouraged within this call. The principal investigator must be employed at the lead organisation, have sufficient standing within the community, and be able to demonstrate ability to lead and manage an integrated work programme. The PI will provide intellectual leadership and oversight of the report and project management. Co-investigators are expected to have significant intellectual input and form part of the leadership team. They must be based at either the lead organisation or a research partner organisation. International co-investigators from anywhere in the world can be included on the proposals. If you are invited to submit a full proposal, more information about how they can be added onto the system will be provided. Researchers and other support staff can also be costed on this proposal, and participating organisations that do not meet the criteria to be research partners can be project partners, and these include things like the third sector organisations, so NGOs, charities, other non-profit civil society organisations, and government departments and businesses. It's not anticipated that through this call we would be connecting researchers, but you would make these connections yourself and submit together. So this section really looks at the assessment criteria for capability, interdisciplinary research team, and leadership and management skills. So here what I've done is I've highlighted the assessment criteria that we're really looking at in this part of the expression of interest, just so that you can see where you're really going to be marked against for this criteria, and just to try to make sure that you address this throughout your proposal. The final page will ask you to provide information about the proposed research. This will include ODA compliance. So obviously GCRF is a key component in the delivery of the UK aid strategy. An official development assistance funding activity focuses on outcomes that promote the long-term sustainable growth of countries on the OECD Development Assistance Committee list, and is administered with promotion of the economic development and welfare of developing countries as its main objectives. Within your expression of interest, you are asked to consider the following points. If you are successful, you will also be requested to provide an ODA statement, which will ask you to address these points as well. So please consider these when you're writing your expression of interest. Next one. So within the expression of interest, so within talking about the proposed research, the assessment criteria, you can see we'll be looking at the strategic rationale and the fit to call, engagement, and then we'll also be looking at the ethics and the ODA and just checking that, and that's how you'll be assessed against those criteria for those areas. The assessment process will be run through a two-stage process. The first stage will consider the expression of interest submitted within the deadline. Anything submitted after the deadline will not be considered. The expressions of interest will be assessed by GCRF challenge leaders and UNDP representatives using the assessment criteria as detailed. It is anticipated that up to 3 proposals will be invited to work with UNDP and invited to submit a full proposal. You will be informed if you have been successful or not. Feedback will not be provided. If you are invited to submit further guidance on creating your full proposal will be provided. The second stage will consider the 3 full proposals. They will be assessed by an independent interview review panel, which will take place on the 27th of November. There will not be written reviews, but you will be given the opportunity to represent your team and respond to comments at interview. Of these 3 proposals, 1 proposal will be awarded. And on the final page, you can see the timeline. So the shortlist, so the expression of interest closes on the 31st of August. There will be a shortlisting on the 7th of September, and you will be informed if you have been successful the week commencing the 10th of September. Following that, if you are successful, you will be connected with individuals in UNDP who will be working with you on your project. And at that stage, you will work up the project together to submit a full proposal by the 6th of November. And following that, that will then go to the interview panel for full proposals on the 27th of November. It's anticipated that we will interview the PI, but the final information for how that will work will be in the full guidance. The decisions will come to applicants at the beginning of December, and awards are expected to start December, January time. That's everything from me. Happy to take any questions.
That's okay, because we have lots of questions. If we start with one of the questions that was emailed in advance, which is there any expectation that all the SDGs have to be considered equally?
Yeah, so I can respond to that one, I think. So yes, broadly speaking, we'd want all SDGs to be taken into account equally. So we're not looking for a report that focuses on particular SDGs, but it's really, I think the focus of the report must be more broadly on how science, technology, research, innovation can advance the SDGs equally. So we're not looking for a report that offers particularly technical solutions to particular SDGs, but rather a support that provides evidence for how investing in science, technology, research, innovation can address SDGs more generally. Hopefully that makes sense, that distinction.
We've had a question from one of our listeners that is, how does this report link to other initiatives in the UN development system, such as the Global Sustainable Development Report and the Technology Facilitation Mechanisms STI Forum?
So Pedro, a question has come through from our participants, which I think is probably best suited for you to answer.
So there are many initiatives and reports that are more intended to take stock of the progress that is taking place on the implementation of the SDGs. And these reports, the one that we are going to do together, tries to address a very concrete challenge that we are facing as UNDP and as UN Development System, which is to try to have a much more systematic engagement with the scientific community to try to address specific and concrete challenges that we are facing on the ground in supporting countries with the implementation of the SDGs. So it will draw on those other reports that are being produced, but is intended to be a report, as Stuart said, that is much more geared towards provide practical and concrete recommendations to the work that the UN does on the ground, working with countries on the SDGs.
Okay. Wonderful. I think the next question is probably best aimed at you as well, Pedro, which is that, what role will the UNDP team play in the entire project?
So the premise, I should say, of the report and the motivation for us to do it together with the Global Challenge Research Fund is that we should not look at being on as policymakers as being passive recipients of scientific findings and research outcomes. The premise of the report is that there is the value in having a dynamic, iterative, interactive dialogue between scientists and policymakers, so that policymakers can feed into researchers and scientists the concrete challenges that they are facing. And there's a common shaping of the research agenda on the one hand, but on the other hand, that is also an ability for policymakers and as on the UN side to draw more quickly from findings from research. So the vision behind this report is that UNDP and the Global Challenge Research Fund supported colleagues on the science side will work together as a seamless team. And Stuart mentioned at the beginning the Pathways for Peace report, which would serve as sort of a model. This was a report that was done jointly by the UN. UNDP was part of the UN team and the World Bank, and a small research team, writing team, I should say, was put together to produce this report. So the vision is to produce a report that is similar to the one to the Pathways for Peace, and UNDP and the colleagues from the researchers will work together seamlessly as a team.
Wonderful, thank you. I think the next question is one that probably Amy and Roshni, you may be able to answer, which is, will the international collaborators receive 100% of FEC?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So it really depends on their role in the project, and also it can depend on the country that they're coming from. So what I would say is that if you are successful, the full application guidance will have all of the information on those kind of costs. So if you just pay careful attention to that, then you should be able to complete your project bearing that in mind.
Okay, fantastic. Another question. So what is the expectation about who will cover the cost of the report and its dissemination? So will submissions be expected to include these costs? And what is the expectation that the PI and CI will participate in the global report dissemination process?
So publication costs are eligible for this call. There will be more information in the full guidance about exactly the costs that will be eligible. But yeah, you can apply for some publication costs for this call.
And I guess we'd expect university research officers to work with applicants to set out those costs. So as regards the second part of the question about whether PIs and CIs would be involved in the global dissemination, I think the answer would be yes. So we've deliberately allowed quite a long period here of up to 24 months. So we'd imagine the report being completed before that 24 months, and then for the dissemination and publicising the report afterwards. And just as happened with the Pathways to Peace report, where there are a number of events after the publication of the report where the PIs and CIs and the UNDP participants or colleagues engaged with a wider public or wider publics. So I think we would expect that dissemination work afterwards.
Okay, great. I've got two questions that appear to be quite related here. I'm not sure who wants to take each part. So the first part is there any special requirement in terms of team composition? But I've also got a question about whether there's a limit on the size of teams. So I don't know if there's a sort of joint answer to those two elements.
So if I take that one, and perhaps Amy corrects me if I get it badly wrong. So in terms of the size of the team, I think we're envisaging something relatively small. So given the cost envelope of 500,000, you're not going to have a team of 20. So it'll be a relatively small team. In terms of who's in that team, again, Pedro might want to come in here as well. You'd envisage somebody senior to lead it, somebody with a strong reputation in the field and credibility, but then potentially a more junior CI and potentially some postdoctoral fellows as well, taking ownership or leadership on particular parts of the report or particular chapters of the report. But Pedro may want to comment more on that from his side.
Thank you, Stuart. No, I think I fully agree with you. I would only make the comment that we are looking for an interdisciplinary team, or at least a PI that is able to provide leadership from an interdisciplinary perspective.
Okay, Amy's happy with that. So let's ask one of these questions that also came in via email ahead of time. So the question said that we note that the TROs describe a large range of audiences for the report. Please can you confirm the primary audience and what you anticipate the report being used for by the respective audiences?
So I think there are two audiences. One comprises people engaged from a policy-making perspective in supporting countries or working with countries in implementing the SDGs. So we can call this the policymakers or practitioners, if you will. So this includes UNDP, other UN agencies, international financial institutions, governments themselves, a broad group of stakeholders more on the practitioner side that are going to benefit from the findings of the report. There's a second audience, which is the scientific community. The report is also intended to speak to scientists, to researchers, to alert them to the challenges that people are facing on the ground, and hopefully will also provide ideas on both the content and the process of shaping research agendas in ways that are going to help us to meet the SDGs. So these are the two core target groups of the report.
Okay. Excellent, thanks Pedro. So next question, we do have quite a lot of questions, so we'll keep going through them. What should ODA compliance look like for the production of this report? And the questioner says they're asking because the ODA normally requires direct beneficiaries in DAC countries, yet the text of the call is about the production of the report. So certainly there will be benefits for DAC countries if the report is acted upon, but this is an indirect, not direct benefit. I think that's a Stuart question as well, maybe.
Yes, okay. I think the question describes the answer quite well, in that ultimately, of course, we've always got to show a primary benefit in developing countries, but quite often in terms of science and research, it's perfectly fine to show that as an indirect benefit. So I think as long as the case is made sufficiently well that the report will generate recommendations which are usable by development agencies or agencies such as UNDP to create primary benefit, then we're fine with that.
Great. So the next question, can you be specific about the anticipated characteristics and track record of the PI?
So I think what we'd be envisaging is somebody of professorial status with a strong track record in the interdisciplinary way, as Pedro mentioned earlier. So combining a number of different fields relevant to development studies, to development. It'll be somebody with a strong publication record in that area, somebody that's a proven track record of managing complex teams and interdisciplinary teams, and somebody that's a proven track record of working with external partners such as UNDP or other types of agencies to get things done practically on the ground. So I think it's probably important to emphasize that we're not looking for a particular disciplinary area here. So we don't have in mind that it would be, economics or a particular part of social science or, a particular part of resilience studies or anything else. So we're looking less at particular disciplines and more at the kind of track record of managing complex projects with development outcomes. Pedro, do you want to add to that?
No, I fully agree, Stuart. I would just emphasize once again that we need someone that, even though it could be someone from a very specific disciplinary area, in the social sciences, in the physical sciences, we need someone that can provide interdisciplinary leadership, and we need someone that has a track record that enables us to see that has been able to provide that leadership.
Okay, excellent. Is there any expectation to engage UNDP countries in the global south?
Yes, ideally. Yeah, absolutely. We would very, very strongly welcome members of the team on the project from Global South.
Excellent. That was a nice, easy one. We've got a slightly longer one now. So the questioner asks, the proposed approach and team could be seen to be dominated by the supplier side, i.e. the researchers and policymakers. What level of engagement is expected with the demand side of governments, the private sector and civil society to help articulate where they need more science and innovation?
Sure. It's a good question. The practitioners target group, in a way, would serve as interpreters, if I could put it in those terms, of the demands that we are seeing from governments, decision makers, also in the private sector, civil society, because those are the ones that are making things happen. Our role as development agencies is to support the efforts of governments and other actors. So I would say that we expect, and that's a function of UNDP being on the project, to be an interpreter, a translator of the demand, of the challenges that we see governments being confronted with and decision makers in the private sector. And I just as an aside, we are being approached actually, not only by governments, but increasingly also by private investors and others that are interested in understanding how can they, and asking the question if they are already making a difference in advancing the SDGs, how to measure it, how to align their investment decisions in the case of investors with the SDGs. So we will try to bring that perspective, those questions, those challenges, and feed into the research efforts.
I think just to add to that as well, there's probably a question there around how evidence for the report is gathered. So you would expect to see fairly strong engagement with the demand side in terms of gathering the evidence for the report. So interviewing, asking questions, assessing that demand and where that demand lies and how it can be directed. And I think that also goes back to the question of audience that Pedro touched on a few moments ago as well, that the demand side is also the audience that we're trying to influence ultimately as well.
Great. So the next question is, how does this process relate to the mandate of the SDSN and the Science and Technology Major Group, and to already organise global science, e.g. the Future Earth?
I think I already addressed that. I think that was the first question. I think this process differs from the others that have been mentioning, being very much a bottom-up approach and driven by the reality that we are confronting on the ground. So UNDP, as other UNA entities, is working with countries on the ground, with developing countries on the ground. And the motivation for the report from our perspective is to make a contribution to engage science to address some of the challenges that we're being confronted with on the ground. So it complements and supplements some of the other efforts that were mentioned in the first question and in this question, such as SDSN, which are, I would say, a little bit more, I don't want to say top-down, but a little bit more overarching, and do not have necessarily that bottom-up perspective that we want to infuse into this effort.
Great, thanks, Pedro. There's a question that I think Amy might be best placed to speak to, which was the question. So they didn't quite follow what was said about the most important part of the assessment criteria. So it's whether you could clarify that a little bit for us.
I think so. All of the assessment criteria is important. It's important that throughout your expression of interest, you're addressing it. So in those different areas where I've highlighted it, for instance, the composition of the team, those are the kind of, we'll be looking at the capability and interdisciplinary research team, we'll be looking at the leadership and management. And then again, when we're looking at the report summary, we'll be looking for strategic rationale and fit to call, we'll be looking for engagement. So all of the assessment criteria they will go through and they will mark it against the assessment criteria, the expression of interest. So it's just important that you make sure that you're fulfilling all of the assessment criteria when you're creating your expression of interest.
Okay, great. And another question that's come in via email, which touches upon the sort of publication costs that we talked about earlier, and presumably wrapped up in that, will the UNDP be responsible for report production and translation, was the question that's being asked.
The split of how the costs will work will be written in the full guidance, but I think it's anticipated that some of the publication costs, they can be costed through the UKRI grant.
But I think in terms of actually producing the report, I expect that UNDP would want to take that forward, even if we were paying for it. So that it fits within their editorial format and goes through their lines of distribution. That would be my understanding.
Yes, Stuart, confirming. And we can manage the process of translation, production, layout, design, copy editing, printing, because we have the systems to do it. But the funding is expected to come from the grant.
Yeah.
Over.
Yeah. I think that's a helpful clarification for everyone.
Fantastic. So one of the emails that came in had several points in it, which we've sort of covered within other questions. But the bit that we think we haven't quite discussed so much yet is questioners asked if we could describe how you envisage the work to be carried out between the UNDP and the UK research teams.
Yeah. So as Amy described earlier, we put a stage in the next part of the process to allow the three groups going forward to engage quite significantly with the UNDP side. And what we'd hope to have there is both a discussion between the three teams and the UNDP side about the content, obviously, but also, as importantly, about the way they're going to work together. And we'd expect to see that reflected in the final application, that the application gives us confidence that the two sides are comfortable with each other, they can work together, that they have a clear understanding of how they'll work together over the next 2 years. We expect to see fairly intensive interaction, or very intensive interaction between the two sides, Pedro mentioned earlier that it's a seamless team. So we're allowing money to be put in for costs for travel. So we'd expect to see people traveling to New York fairly regularly to meet up with that team, to engage obviously by phone, by Skype, etc. So we want to see a very close interaction with clear roles defined for all members of the team on both sides.
We've just had another question come in. There is still time if you're thinking of more questions. We're coming to the end of the questions that we've already got, so if you've got another burning question, do start typing it now. The question that we've got at the moment is the focus on creating new research results or on pooling together existing findings? The questioner observes that the budget seems to lie somewhere in between, given that it has to address all the SDGs.
So I think, and Pedro might want to come here as well, I think it's important to reiterate again that we're not looking for a report that solves the SDGs so much as a report that talks about the importance and the ways in which science, research, technology, innovation can help us more broadly address those SDGs. So I think of the first point. Going back to the substantive issue about whether this is a work of synthesis or work of new research, I think it probably is a mixture of both. Personally, and I think I'd very much welcome Pedro's input here. Personally, I would like to see quite a lot of synthesis in there. We know that an awful lot of work has been done in a fairly fragmented way to address this question by lots of different organisations and individual researchers. So you'd expect to see a fairly substantial work of synthesis around what that evidence is telling us, but then you'd also expect to see some original research taking that a step forward and producing the kinds of recommendations that Pedro mentioned earlier. Pedro, is that broadly in line with your thinking, or would you like to add to that or nuance that in any way?
No, absolutely. Just to confirm what you've just said, Stuart, and so it's a combination synthesis, but also we expect the report, and there's the importance of engaging with the GCRF, of providing some forward-looking guidance both to practitioners as well as to researchers. And that could be could take a variety of forms. It could be some taxonomy, framing, organizing framework to enable us to take stock of research findings in a way that is helpful to policymakers. And here what I would emphasize is the importance again of interdisciplinarity and recognizing the interlinkages across issues. If I were to highlight a recent article that I think does some of what we envision in the report, it was an article published in Science at the end of June on the challenge of achieving net zero emissions energy systems. And that article is interesting. The first author is Stephen Davis, because it's interdisciplinary. It brings to the effort that led to the publication of this article, brought economists, experts on energy systems, experts in natural sciences, physicists, and this is the kind of coalition that we need to bring together to address a challenge such as how can we generate net zero emissions energy systems. And so this is an example, a snapshot. There are many others, conflict prevention, food systems. And so what I think the reports should be able to provide is an organizing framework to enable us to take stock of some of these constantly emerging research findings, but also to make a contribution either by picking up on a topic or by taking a set of issues and providing a little bit of an illustration and advancing our knowledge on the importance of having these interdisciplinary, interlinked approaches to SDG implementation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good steer, that the originality of the report is likely to lie in its illumination of interdisciplinary links between possibly existing research, but also emerging and new research.
We think we may have sort of touched upon this next question within your last answer, but I'll put it to you just in case it triggers any additional thoughts and clarification. The questioner asked, in terms of team composition and therefore the report content, would you expect climate science, water technologies, agricultural experts to be represented on the team, or more broadly, innovation processes and methodologies expertise with evidence drawn from these fields?
I'm going to give a non-answer there, which nobody's going to like. I think we would expect to see a strong justification for the team that people would like to put together. So we're not, just to reiterate, we're not looking for particular areas of expertise, but we are looking for applicants to justify the people on the team and show how they can achieve this kind of interdisciplinary and original framework that Pedro was just mentioning a few moments ago. I'm sorry that doesn't help very much, but it might help a little bit.
So the next question was asking whether, I don't know whether Amy, you can answer this one, whether you can confirm if the funding for the study has actually been confirmed, because the TRRs appear to indicate that it wasn't definitively allocated. Is that something that you can speak to?
Stuart, I don't know if you want to answer this.
Yeah, okay. So the situation we're in is that we are 99.9% confident that the money will be signed off. So I think it's absolutely fine to work on the assumption that it will be signed off, because I'd be absolutely stunned if it weren't. And it might help to link that response to the timing. So we chose to go ahead with this call before we had absolute confirmation, because we think it's such an important call that strengthens our relationship with UNDP and provides an intervention at the right time into the UNDP system. So we're very, very confident that the money will be approved, and we were very keen to get moving very quickly with it.
Okay, great. Again, another question that I think we've touched on a little bit. The questioner asked, given the focus on the Global South, are we able to provide only summary information on Global North science support for the SDGs?
If this is in terms of what should go in the application, I think given the word limits, it's likely to be summary anyway. If it's in terms of what appears in the report, I think we'd expect people to follow the leads that are there. So to look at obviously the Global North, which is providing an awful lot of support in this area, but also those parts of the Global South where research and science and innovation systems are now emerging that are working towards the SDGs. And that, of course, is very, very important. So I think we would expect people to follow the leads rather than any predetermined pathway that we might set out. I hope that answers the question. I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but I hope that answers it.
Thank you. So the last question that I've got in at the moment, unless anybody dashes to get one in the last 10 minutes, is whether we could provide a link for the article in Nature that, Pedro, that you mentioned a bit earlier. I think that might just be collecting together the things that have come out of this webinar. And I know that the slides are already available for you to download, but I think we're going to compile the questions that have come in through email and through the GoToWebinar forum and put together some answers for those. So unless anybody's got any further questions, are there any final comments that any of the three of you would like to make?
Yeah, can I just say a few words about this section report summary and the expression of interest document?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we've not had any questions on that section, which I thought we might do. And I think it's probably useful to focus people's minds on the kinds of things that we'd expect to see in there. So I think we'd want something around what kind of evidence you'd be gathering, where you might get that evidence from, how you might engage stakeholders to generate that evidence, probably some indication of how to structure the report, how you might go around structuring that report to do some of the things, particularly that Pedro was talking about earlier, to give some examples that give a flavour of the kinds of concrete interventions that could be made. But I think we want to see something around envisaged impacts as well. So what kinds of policy and practice impacts might emerge from this report? So I know there wasn't a question around that, but I think it's probably important to focus people's minds on that. Pedro, do you want to add anything there? Because I think that's quite an important section.
Not particularly on that section, Stuart, but just at the end, I would like to say a few words if I could.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Thank you, Stuart, Amy. I would just want to share with all the colleagues participating in this call how grateful I was to receive the questions and how stimulating I found the interaction, and how encouraged I am by the interest and the dialogue that we've had over the last hour or so. Speaking very frankly, at the beginning when the SDGs were adopted, many people were not quite sure what to do with them. Some governments were not fully understanding if they meant that we needed to do things differently. And now, 3 ways into the implementation, we are seeing on the ground that governments are getting more interested in the SDGs. And as I mentioned, also we see, which was a little bit surprising, private sector entities, especially investors, approaching us to understand how can they make a contribution towards the SDGs. So, as Stuart said, this report is not going to provide all the answers, unfortunately, but we are firmly convinced that it's going to be a very important contribution to nurture a much closer engagement between science and practitioners, development practitioners, as well as policymakers, to enable us to move towards the SDGs. I'm firmly convinced that we need to fully mobilize science, creativity, innovation, to enable us to get to the SDGs. Otherwise, it's just not going to be possible. So just a word of thank you to everyone, and thanks also to the Global Challenge Research Fund from UNDP side for this investment.
Thanks, Pedro. I think we'd also send those thanks back to you for your engagement on the whole process.
And Amy, do you have anything that you'd like to say as we wrap up that you'd like people to focus on?
Yeah, just thank you for everyone for listening.
Wonderful. Right. Okay. In that case, we will gather all the questions up. So I know there was one that came in right at the very, very last there. So we will make sure that answers come to you via email just to clarify everything. But it just remains for me to say thank you to everybody for joining us for this webinar. We hope you found it useful and that we would appreciate your feedback. So please do get in touch if there's anything else that occurs to you as a result of what we've talked about today. A recording of the webinar will be made available in the coming days. So that should come out to you via email from either Amy or Deanna, I suspect. So do look out for that. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, and do get in touch if you have any further questions.